Let's get started. The design for this painting was based on the letter H and also on perspective lines. After assessing this photograph I took in the Valhalas, I decided to flop it the other way so the little lake in the distance would be on the right-hand side. To slow down the drying time of my acrylic paint, I sprayed water on the back of my canvas. This is a mixture of the polymer gloss medium and glazing medium, into which I'm adding quinacridone red in random strokes. Once the red layer was dry, I added that mixture of the two polymer mediums along with some nickel azo yellow in random strokes. After drying that layer of paint, I start doing a chalk drawing. I put the third lines on to make it easier for me to add the placement of my different elements. At this stage of drawing, use geometric shapes and keep it really simple. Really pay attention to the angles of the things that you're drawing, and also be aware of what will look best where you're placing it. You can move trees around to make it look better for your composition. And also really pay attention to the perspective lines for the water, and also that when you're drawing your reflections that they are underneath the things that they belong to. Once the chalk drawing was done, I took an acrylic paint pen and inked in the drawing to make dark lines that I'd be able to see as I added more and more layers. Alternatively, I could have used a round brush and some black paint to do this. After the acrylic paint was dry, I wiped off the chalk with a moist cloth. This is dioxazine purple, which has been mixed into quite a bit of the dual polymer medium. That's the GAC 500, which is the polymer gloss, and also some of the glazing medium. This helps to dry a little bit slower. Here I'm adding quite a bit of the paint. I'm aiming for more of the center of the tree and then going and spreading the paint out from the middle. By having a lot of the paint, making it nice and soupy, I have a bit of paint that I can push around with that knife. My goal is to keep the paint thin and not to go too heavy. I want little bits of that orange to still show through and make the change of color interesting as I go along. To get a nice bead of paint on the edge of your palette knife, pull it through the paint on an angle and then draw your knife down vertically to get those nice straight lines on the trees. And then when you go to your broader strokes, turn your palette knife sideways again and pull down to make those nice rock shapes. Less paint for the little trees, little tiny marks to make them look more distant. And look for all the places where you're going to add the dark paint. Notice how purple the paint looks until it dries. It goes a little bit more neutral when that purple is drying on top of the orange background. To make the various greens, I took some quinacridone red, some Indian yellow, and cadmium yellow light plus ultramarine blue. The quinacridone red is used to dull back the greens a bit further, and the cadmium yellow light is to lighten the greens. To vary the types of greens, I would switch back and forth between the cadmium yellow light and the Indian yellow. I continue to add the cadmium yellow light to make the brighter yellow greens where the sun is hitting a little bit more. As I'm adding these various green colors, I'm careful not to cover up all of my purples or all of my orange color. That little hit of bright yellow is to give me some intensity to measure my neutral colors against. For these background mountains, I took cobalt teal and some titanium white to paint them in. I know that I'm going to be doing some glazes, which will darken the paint, so that's why I'm painting a little bit lighter than it will be in the end. If you don't have cobalt teal, you can take phthalo blue, add some of the cadmium light, yellow light, and some white, and maybe a titch of red just to dull it back a little bit. There's less white added to this foreground mountain to make it look a little bit closer by making it darker. I keep in mind too that the acrylic paint that I'm placing will darken as it dries, and also as I'm going along I'm leaving little edges of orange to make the color more interesting in the painting. On my palette I mixed a few tints of quinacridone red by adding the titanium white, and I'm adding it into the sky and doing it roughly too, so not too smoothly, and allowing the colors to change a little bit, working between those trees to create sky holes, and also as I go along I'm allowing little bits of the orange still to show through that sky. To remove bits of that red paint to bring some more of that orange forward, while the paint was wet, I took a scrunched up moist paper towel and dabbed away some of the paint. To create a very subtle gradation, I'm adding a little bit more white as I move down towards the mountains from the top of the sky and as I go over to the right. I added even more white to that same Quinacridone red and adding little clouds skittering across the sky. This creates more interesting transitions of shades within that shape of the sky. A way to make neutral colors is to take your three primaries and mix them together. This is the yellow, the red, and the blue, but there's a little bit more yellow and blue to keep it to the green side. In these three colors, there's also titanium white and some of the polymer medium. Because this calm water is a flat plane, I take my palette knife and I make strokes from left to right in various places to show that this is actually a flat surface. Here I'm back to the Cobalt teal, to which I've added a little bit of red to make it a little bit duller. To remove some of that blue-green color, I used a rubber-tipped color shaper. To show the reflection of the sky and the water, I'm using the same Quinacridone red, but with less white. This shallow, murky water will make the reflections reflect a little more darkly. To create energetic marks, I'm allowing my wrist to move around and I hold the knife loosely. Why a pink sky? Well, I like the pink because it is a contrast to the greens that we see elsewhere. Red and green are complements or almost complements to each other depending on the green that you use. All the other colors on this painting have a common color of yellow, including the violet we put down because we put it down so thinly, allowing the orange to shine through and to dull it. The original orange background also contains yellow, which is shining through the reds of the sky. And at a later stage, I will add a glaze of yellow into the sky as well, and that'll create good color harmony and continuity throughout the painting. For the first stage of painting the rocks, I'm using various tints of Quinacridone red. For the foreground rocks, I use bigger strokes, and for the background rocks, I use smaller, flatter strokes. For the rocks, I'm varying the shapes and sizes to make them look more natural. There's some boulders in the distance as well behind the little bit of lake. Before glazing yellow over the rocks, I'm going to go into some of the greens and just touch things up. I'm adding some darker greens in places, bits of lighter greens, and adjusting until I'm happy with the values. I'm also looking at the reflections in the water to make sure I have different colors in there, lightening some of the reflections of the mountain, adding some more little tiny bit brighter bits of yellow greens on top of that kind of dull green that we have. Now I'm ready to take the nickel azo yellow, which is a very transparent yellow, and very lightly dab over top of the rocks and anywhere where I want to turn things into a yellowish color or a yellow orange. I'm using a very light touch, and I've added quite a bit of the acrylic medium into this. And as I go along, if I need to, I use a moist cloth to wipe back some of the paint. I'm being very gentle as I go along because a bit too much of this will actually make the painting not work out as well. So very light touches. By adding the yellow into the sky and the reflections of the sky, it's tying into the rest of the painting where there's bits of yellow everywhere. Here I'm taking the cadmium yellow light and adding bits of edge to the shrubs that I see, wherever I think the light might be leaking through to hit these shrubs. Here, this is ultramarine blue plus white. It looks quite gray against this teal color, and that's because ultramarine blue is a historical color, and when you add white, it kind of grays back. The shades I'm choosing to go onto these background mountains, I'm trying to make the same as the teal underneath, and I'm also not covering up all the teal. I'm allowing little bits of that to show through. This close-up shows that I've allowed the marks to really show up on those background mountains, creating crags. There's a lot of light bouncing up onto these boulders, so I'm adding some tinted ultramarine blue. To make color changes in the water and to show the horizontal flat plane, I'm adding Quinacridone red that's tinted with white. When you're doing this kind of color change, try to make the value the same as the other color on which you're painting. In this grayscale version, you can't see that there are color changes in the reflections of the trees or in the background mountains. This kind of color change helps you to maintain your mass shapes within your painting and thereby keeping your design intact. I wanted more texture in this tree, so I added cadmium orange, let it dry, and then I reapplied the dioxazine purple on top with little strokes through it with my palette knife. Here I brought forward the stone on the left-hand side to create a less straight line between the front and the back of the painting, and I also added some glazes of yellow over the ultramarine blue areas on the boulders. As I get closer to the end of the painting, I continue to add varying shades and brightnesses of the greens that are in the trees. I'm using bigger, bolder, and thicker strokes in the foreground and thinner and smaller, narrower strokes in the distance. To make it look like more sun was hitting the tops of the rocks, I took white with a little bit of yellow and did some more painting on the top edges. This is cadmium orange added onto the boulder and a few other places. A good way to check the value plan of your painting is to take a grayscale photograph. I'm pleased to see that I've maintained my value plan in my design, and there's still a sense of light and brightness even though this is a black and white photograph. To finish this painting off and to add some color change, I added ultramarine blue tinted with white into that foreground water. A supply list is coming up. Thanks so much for watching. Subscribe for notice of new videos. Take care.